Hello and welcome to the Tomcast. I'm Tom, president and dictator for life of 515comics.com. Today I'm coming to you in audio format to present a new segment for the Tomcasts that I'm calling Marvelous Discussions with Fabulous Guests. You may remember at the start of the year I promised that there would be more fabulous guests, and so here I am delivering on that promise because I'm awesome. So I'd like to introduce today's fabulous guest, Mr. Chantit Simma.
Hello. Thank you for welcoming me to this wonderful audio podcast.
And thank you for being here, sir. If you viewers do not know, Chantit is actually the fellow who came up with both of the Tomcast logos that have been used since the inception of the show. So thank you for that, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
So the new segment, Marvelous Discussions with Fabulous Guests, the idea is that I'm just going to have people onto the Tomcast, either in audio version like this, or perhaps someday actually in video. But the idea of the segment is basically just to bring people on and have a discussion about a particular topic pertaining to comics or the comic book industry. So Chantit is a fellow who is an artist and has made comics before. And maybe if you could just take a couple minutes, Chantit, and actually explain to some of the viewers what kind of comics you are into, what kind of comics you're interested in, and maybe a few things that you have read recently.
Okay, pretty broad question. I pretty much read anything. I think I started off like everybody else, just really drawn into like the superhero genre and stuff like that. I think that's everyone's sort of first step into comics. As I got older and a little bit more mature, I was looking more into, I guess, deeper stories and like a lot of the like independent titles, because I mean, American comics have to be more, or I feel that there has to be more than like the superhero genre. When I started delving into independents, there was a lot more depth, a lot more drama, a lot more character-driven stories.
Right on.
Not to say that superheroes aren't, drama-driven as well, or
So when did you, have you always read a lot of comics? Did you read a lot of comics when you were a kid?
Actually, no. At the beginning of it was, my real pull into comics was pretty much based on art. I've always been drawing all my life, and then the moment I picked up a comic, I was like really curious as to the art style and stuff like that. So a lot of my collection is based on artists as opposed to stories and writers. Like I said, as I got older, I was reading more, and I was like, oh wow, this is really, really interesting. Like, it's not just the art. It's like this marriage of art and story, especially when you have like a really good writer and you get pulled into the story. And then all of a sudden, my taste in art started to widen too, because it didn't have to be a particular style.
Let's go ahead and just delve into our discussion topic for today. And the discussion topic that I selected is, what is your preferred story format in comics? Now, there's any number of different ways to present a story in comics. I mean, really, the combinations are pretty much limitless. But for the purposes of our discussion, I kind of limited it to three broad categories. The first being a gag per page or gag a day type comic, where effectively each comic strip or page of a comic is effectively telling a little story in and of itself. Even if it's just setup and punchline, there's still kind of a beginning-end structure to each page of the comic. The next grouping would be episodic, which basically, it might be one big long story, but it's broken down into smaller arcs, where a reader could come in at any one of these small episodes, chapters, arcs, and read that from beginning to end, and learn about the characters and know enough that they wouldn't have to read the whole thing to get the whole story. And then the last form would be epics, which would, instead of being a grouping of small arcs that tell a story, would really just be one giant arc. And of course, all of these things can be mixed and matched and interchanged. You can have epics that kind of have episodes, or episodes that turn into an epic. And there are episodic comics that are gag-a-day because each page or strip ends in something funny or kind of has a punchline, even though it is a longer format of comic. So the idea is, as an artist, as a writer, as a creator, what sort of comic do you think you would prefer to create? And also, what do you find yourself reading the most of?
Based on the three that you've presented, I can pretty much dig into all three as far as reading. As far as creating, I think I would lean more towards the episodic that would eventually be compiled into an epic. Although I've heard, well, not that I've seen, but I've heard that there are like gag-a-day ones that compile into an epic, and I think that's like phenomenal. Like, I can't believe that's someone did that, and it's like, it works. It's not like it's silly either. It's like, it works. The jokes are coming through, but there's this overarching message to it too. I was like, wow, that's really impressive. And from a creator and a writer standpoint, I find that really interesting. I like the episodic ones that go into sort of an epic arc.
Do you think that you're drawn to that because, I guess what I think is appealing about the episodic type of story format is that you can really, and we've kind of discussed this before, but you can tell short stories about a setting or a group of characters or a specific character that have resolution, but not necessarily an ending. And I guess that's something that's pretty appealing about that format of storytelling. And you can still string those all together, and one can reference a previous arc or a previous episode and allude to a future episode, but is still kind of self-contained in and of itself. It's a very flexible type, I guess, and it kind of makes sense that I wrote it in the middle of those three different types, because I feel like it's one that could easily take aspects of either of the others. Because, like you say, like doing an epic, like one big long story that's gag-a-day, like that's really hard to imagine. Like, that seems like such an undertaking that you would be telling one big long story with jokes at regular intervals all the way through.
and the best thing is that you're like not even aware that it's going to be an epic. And so like right at the end, it's like, wow, this meant this and this compiled into this, and it's just an amazing realization from a reader's standpoint.
Yeah, I feel like that can happen. And, I'm still learning more about print comics because I've always been a webcomic guy. But it seems like that can happen a lot in webcomics just because of the actual way that webcomics are presented. There are so many examples of like an epic story that strives to have a punchline every day. I mean, one of my favorites in high school was 8-Bit Theater, which was a Sprite comic, and that was one big, long, huge, epic story, but it was just like throwaway gags at the end of every page. But it all laced together, and they kept bringing stuff back, and like it was very self-referential, and that's part of what made it so funny, was that it was one big, long story. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if you look at it like as one big entity, you're like, how could they have planned this? And you almost have to question, like, did they? did they plan it to actually be like this one big long story, or did it just sort of happen this way?
Right.
Which I guess that's a good question for your audience to be asking, is that, this seems more brilliant than it could possibly be. Yeah, I guess to bring it back to episodic, maybe, what are some examples of some comics or stories that you have read that you feel like really exemplify this, and that would be things that you would really want to like emulate in some fashion if you were to tell a story in the same format?
All right, here's a story. The first comic book I ever picked up
Awesome.
was an X-Men comic. It was X Factor. It was the issue. Can't remember numbers. I'm losing my nerd cred. But it was the issue before Scott Summers had to give up his son to save his son's life. Just that enclosed like episodic arc of like, I don't know, like 4 issues or something like that. I thought that was really cool, and I mean, I got really emotional. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe like there were writers writing stuff like this. Spoilers for those people that have never read this. His son that he gives up eventually becomes Cable. So he gives up his son. It's like, oh, well, your son's going to die here, but if you if you send him into the future, he'll survive. So God ends up giving up his son. It's a very emotional moment. I got teary-eyed. Please cut that out. But so you've got this small episode of what happens to these characters. And the events that happen there are repercussions for later episodes. And I've always said that, this is going to make me sound so sexist, but here we go. It's like women have soap operas and men have comic books, but comic books tend to be almost like a soap opera.
Yeah,
comic books are soap operas for guys. And once again, I don't mean to reference it that way. I mean, girls read comic books now too.
And guys watch soap operas.
I watched Melrose Place when it first came out.
Heck yeah, Heck yeah, man. It's high drama. So episodic is your preferred story format in comics. Are there any projects that you are working on now or hoping to work on that are going to be in that style? Or is it something that you just hope to do one day?
It is definitely a hope. It is definitely an aspiration. I find that as a creator, as far as being an artist, I've honed my skills, and I think I've honed my skills to a point where I feel it's acceptable. Because before I didn't feel like it was acceptable, and I think that's a shortcoming from a lot of artists, because we're really self-critical. We're like, this isn't good enough, or there should be another line here, or there should be more lighting here, or I forgot this shadow. And one thing I've learned from other artists too is like you got to learn to let that go. The moment you feel like you stop, let it go, stop, because you're missing your opportunity on other projects. When you're harping over one piece or one page or one panel, I'm at a point where it's, you know what, I like it, I'm not going to change it, it's fine, let it go, move on. So from a visual arts perspective, I'm very confident. As far as being a writer, that's a totally different ball game for me. It's something I need to learn. Just like art, I have to hone that skill. I've been doing a lot of reading. I like everybody else, I watch a lot of movies, and there's structure in that too. Just trying to understand storytelling. I think a lot of times, like in some of the comic books I read, the art of storytelling, it's really rare to find now. I see a lot of comic books that are like designed to be movies. Like they go in saying, okay, I'm going to write this story, but it's clear that they want it to be a movie, when instead they should just tell a story. I'm just trying to learn to do it right, because no matter how good or bad my art is, stories will always trump over that, I feel. And that's funny because I'm an artist. You would think like, oh yeah, the art has to be awesome. But you know what? If the story is really compelling and it draws your readers in, it could be like stick figures. You can make people cry and then go through all the gamut of emotions with it. You can have story arcs with that. It really doesn't matter. I mean, the difference between like cave paintings and like my art is just that mine has more lines. That's pretty much it. That's the bare bones of it. I mean, I can go on a lecture about this. I don't want to, but I will say this. There's a great book out there by Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. There's a reason why it's part of the curriculum at a lot of art schools and a lot of schools that focus on comic book art. And to anyone watching this, I mean, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. You're going to learn a lot. But yeah, my shortcomings are as a writer. Still learning sort of that format. I like the idea of mysteries. I like seeding details and having my audience get drawn into that, moving with the story and trying to figure things out with my protagonist. Yeah. You know, I really enjoy that format. If I ever have the opportunity to finally get something compiled together and published, that's the type of story that I want to get. I want to do something episodic, sort of mystery, and then eventually there's this huge epic resolution.
That sounds really cool, man. I'm glad that you kind of have that fire in you, that you're really like I want to move, because you're right. That is something artists do tend to really, and I mean any kind of artist, like any kind of creative person, generally they are their biggest critic, and it's really easy for them to just get bogged down. And I think that is a whole nother subject. And I feel like the other thing you brought up of like another like very discussionable subject, and also the subject of the balance of writing versus art versus, I mean, like there's so many things that make a good comic, and just having one of those things really good might make it so that you have a bad comic. Like, you could have really amazing art, but it could be written terribly and nobody cares.
Oh, I've seen a
Yeah.
bunch of those.
Oh, yeah. And vice versa. You could have really good storytelling, but the art is really distractingly bad or really disjointed and not meshing well with the art. And so I think that there is, I mean, again, that's another thing that would be a really great discussion topic. So I have to have you back on the show.
Oh, joy. More being fabulous.
Exactly. That's right. Every time you're a guest on Marvelous Discussions with Fabulous Guests, you become more fabulous.
More fabulous.
That's permanent, by the way, so you're welcome for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I guess let's go ahead and we'll wrap up. Again, I want to thank today's fabulous guest, Chantit Simma, for being on the program. And if our viewers would like to check in on you and see what project you are working on, and if you're starting on anything big, where can they go to hear about it?
You can find my artwork at www.wildcats25.deviantart.com. Take a look at all my artwork there. I do a silly little vlog on YouTube called Boring Words. Just simply go onto YouTube and just type in Boring Words, you'll find me. And I have a Twitter at Chantit Simma. You can tweet me if you want. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, thanks again for being on the show. Thank all of you for watching and listening. It's always appreciated. And look forward to more episodes of Marvelous Discussions with Fabulous Guests, where we will discuss other things relating to comics and art and writing, and it will be good. And I want you to all have a good weekend, and I'll see you around.
Later.